Afternoon, I want to talk about Parshas Yisro. Parshas Yisro, just as a background, chapter 18 of Exodus, before the children of Israel received the Torah at Sinai, at Har Sinai. We're told that Yisro comes, the father-in-law of Moshe, and he comes and he gives advice to Moshe. He gives very good advice. Tells Moshe, you're doing too much yourself. He says, you're doing too much yourself. And he says in the pasuk, he says that the Omer Chose Moshe Tova Devar Tosa. You're not doing it right. These are Moshe's judging the people. He says, you're not doing it right. Tova Devar. He's not the first father-in-law in the world to tell his son-in-law he's doing something wrong, but unlike Yaakov's father-in-law, they really didn't get along. And Yitzchak, who never has any direct interaction with his father-in-law. We don't know anything about Avram's father-in-law. And Yossi's father-in-law seems to have been his jailer at one point. Here, Moshe's father-in-law says that you're doing it wrong. And he tells him how to set up the judicial system. So the question is, I want to just take a basic question before we go through the verses together. What's this passage doing here? We have the whole portion is called Yisro. Why are we naming a portion after Yisro? Who is Yisro? Now, as I said, when I went to visit Har Sinai, there was the well of Moshe in the northern Saudi Arabian desert. There was the well of Moshe, and this well was right next to a huge museum that they were building for Yisro. Yisro is a very revered prophet amongst the Druze and the Muslims, and in northern Saudi Arabia, which is where he lived, which was Midian, he was a very big history. So what's the basic message of Yisro coming here? And I want to talk about this at the beginning because it relates to something from today's Daf Yomi. And let me just first give you the overarching view, and then we'll go into the granular details. The overarching view, to my mind, is very simple, because I want to be able to answer this question at the end. Like, why is this relevant to my life? The overarching question is, this portion is about how God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. And that's what makes us singular, special, chosen people. It uses such language. It says the language of chosenness. What is it? What does the word say here? Here, let me just pull up the pasuk. The pasuk says, here, hold on. What does it say? He says, the verse states, people went up. It says in the verse, if you listen to my voice and you guard my commandments, you will be for me a treasure, a segula mikol amim. You will be my treasure, and you will be for me a nation of priests and a holy nation. We are going to be, our ancestors are selected. We are the ones who got the Torah. We are the ones who received the Ten Commandments. Only the Jewish people. But the basic point is, the portion begins with Yisro. Yisro is telling Moshe, you're not doing it right. The fundamental message here, first of all, the Jewish people don't have all the answers. Even Moshe Rabbeinu was told the answers by a priest of Midian. The fundamental message. And number two, that even though we have a special relationship with God as evinced by the Ten Commandments at Sinai, nevertheless, the nations of the world also have a path to God. So prior to the Ten Commandments, we have to receive this passage about Yisro to remind us that the nations of the world also have a path. Just because we have a path doesn't mean that the other nations don't have a path. The other nations have a path too, and we can learn from their path. We can grow and learn from their path. And more than that, our path is connected to their path. And just like we learn from their path, so too they can learn from our path. So this is the overarching message. I want to share it with you in by basically, first of all, sharing a comment from Rabbi Soloveitchik, and then sharing a text of the Talmud from today's Daf Yomi or tomorrow's Daf Yomi that relates to it. So first, I want to start by sharing with you a passage from Rabbi Soloveitchik. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, first of all, it says that Yisro, the priest of Midian, heard about the father of Moshe, heard everything that God had done to Moshe's people, and he led them out of Egypt. And so the basic question is, what did Yisro hear? What did Yisro hear? So Rashi tells us that Yisro heard Mashmu Hashem, but wasn't just what he heard. What did he hear that caused him to come? The Rashi said he heard about the splitting of the sea and the war with Amalek. So he heard these two events. Commentaries point out what's so special about that these were events that he heard about in the past, and that he came, even though these events were finished, the splitting of the sea and the war with Amalek. But there were other things that were ongoing. So, let me just say before we read Rabbi Soloveitchik, sometimes you hear things about somebody else, and it could cause you to jump on the bandwagon, or it could cause you to have just tremendous jealousy and anger and hatred. So we're seeing the flip side of Amalek here. Amalek sees the Jewish people have success, and their response is to attack. Whereas Yisro hears about the splitting of the sea, and his response is to join. So it's the flip side. This is Rabbi Soloveitchik's point. Let me read this to you. Let me read to you what Rabbi Soloveitchik says. There's Rabbi Soloveitchik. Hold on. Let me read this beautiful what Rabbi Soloveitchik says here. It's a little bit long, but if you're able to follow it, or you stop me if you miss a point, because it's so geschmack that I know it had a big impact on me. He wrote this in. This comes from Noros Harav, Volume 5, page 79 to 87. But obviously, we're not going to read all. This is a summary of it in the Chumash with the commentary based on teachings of Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. So it says, Vayishma Yisro. What did Yisro hear? So Yisro's arrival, his reception by Moses, the advice that he gave, and his departure are given in this passage immediately before the giving of the Torah. And right before this is the war with Amalek. So why are these two passages the prologue to the giving of the Torah? Why are the passage of Amalek and Yisro the two narratives that are the prologue to the giving of the Torah at Sinai? So this is Rabbi Soloveitchik. He says Yisro was a Gentile. He was the Archbishop of Midian. He was the head of the whole community. I'll never forget, we walked into one of the caves there. A bat flew out right at us. I don't see if anybody here was there with me. And I don't see anybody here who was there on the stream. But we went to see, he was like the king of Midian, but he was the head priest. He came to the Jewish camp with an open mind. He wanted to observe for himself what the Jews had accomplished. He was so overwhelmed by their conduct that he renounced paganism and embraced Judaism. He didn't become Jewish. He didn't become Jewish, but he embraced Judaism. didn't become Jewish, but he embraced Judaism. Chazal do not describe Yisro as a saintly Gentile, but rather he's portrayed as a decent person whose positive reaction should have been emulated by other Gentiles. The rest of the world should have had the same reaction as Yisro. Wow, look what's going on in the world. This revelation of God to the world. This should be transformative to all of us. But we're only told that Yisro came. Once in a while we hear from other nations, but we're only told that Yisro came. So this shows one possible reaction to the splitting of the sea and the revelation of Sinai. But the Amalekites were also impressed with the Jews, writes Rabbi Soloveitchik, but their reaction was different. They believed that Amalek believed that a nation which could defy Pharaoh, defeat the Egyptians, gain freedom, defeat the regime, but has different laws from the rest of the world, was a threat to the world. The Amalekites viewed the Jewish people as a threat, whereas Yisro viewed them as somebody who should be emulated. So Amalek came to attack. The Jews had not threatened Amalek in any manner, yet Amalek attacked them. So we have two different reactions to the giving of the Torah at Sinai. Amalek's reaction is to attack. They want to have separate laws from everybody else. And Yisro's action is to embrace and let's say how we can do it better. So Rabbi Soloveitchik continues that the first set of tablets, which we read about in this week's parsha, is very different from the second tablet. The second set was given with, modesty. God tells Moses, you engrave it yourself. You go up the mountaintop, when nobody's there. But the first set was given with a tremendous attention. The whole world was watching it. It was with thunder and voices through the sound of a shofar. God, this is Rabbi Soloveitchik's presentation. God wanted the world to know that the Jews had received the tablets. God wanted the whole world to know about it, and that there was a new code, a new moral code in the world, a new set of laws. The other nations didn't have to accept it, but they had to be aware of it. So why was this necessary? The purpose of this public spectacle of Mount Sinai in those days, 3,500 years ago, we gathered for the public spectacle of giving the Torah at Sinai. Now, yesterday, there's the public spectacle of the Super Bowl. Look how the world has fallen. Okay, so they had to be, why did the Gentiles need to be aware of this? So that the purpose was that so God could eventually convert the entire universe to become the residence of God. All will accept the reign of God. The time will come when the whole world must realize that the tablets given to the Jews contain the truth, and they have to accept them, just as the Jews accepted them so many years ago. So the Torah was offered to everybody and must eventually be accepted by everybody. And I'm going to explain it in a moment. Hold on, Thera. Let me just come back to you in one moment, Thera. This off, because let me finish what Rabbi Soloveitchik saying. I know there's going to be a lot of discussion about it. This offer was extended to every human being. The Midrash says that God offered it to all the nations, and they rejected it because they didn't like one aspect of it. Only the Jews said, we will do and we will listen. Yet the Jews were the only ones who took advantage. The Jews were sensitive, understanding the exaltedness and beauty of a life which is lived in compliance with the Torah. No other nation understood this. Still, Hashem exposed all of humankind to this event to allow them the opportunity to accept it. Will humankind eventually accept this reality and ultimately realize the greatness of a Torah lifestyle? The Torah's answer is yes. And the story of Yisro is the proof. In the eschatological era, the same event will occur on a universal scale, meaning to say, the whole world will recognize the truth of the Torah. Now, that doesn't mean they have to become Jewish, but they'll recognize the truth of the Torah. Torah wants us to know that there are certain people who will never be converted. They understand that the Jews represents something unique. But their response to that realization is one of hate and desire to destroy. So we have these two opposite reactions to Matan Sinai, to Matan Torah. We have Amalek, which views us as a threat because of Matan Torah, because of our uniqueness, and Yisro, who views us as something, as like the lodestar, something to be emulated. And that's what this portion is doing here. Yisro is telling us, the Torah is telling us what the purpose of Matan Torah is. The purpose of Matan Torah, to have a transformation, not just of the Jewish people, but of the whole world. Because if it's just of the Jewish people, it doesn't make any sense. Why would God just want this small nation just to be, this is me talking now, Rabbi Soloveitchik, why would God just want the Jewish people to keep the laws of the Torah or to recognize his greatness through the Torah? We're such a small group of people. I don't know, 12 million, 15 million, depending how you count. But if you say that the purpose of Torah is for the whole world, and the Jewish people are like the priests to the world, that's what God calls us. He calls us, it says in this portion, Mamlechet Kohanim, the Goy Kadosh. What's our purpose? Our purpose is to teach the Holy Torah to the whole world. So if that, now we understand why Yisro is here beforehand. What's Yisro doing here? Yisro is here to tell us that this is our purpose. Our purpose is to interact with the nations of the world and teach the power of the Torah, teach the powerful moral clarity as taught by the Torah. I want to just pause for a moment to hear what Thira. So how do we deal with this tension that the Jewish people have the mandate from God to be an Am Segula, to be a chosen nation, a special nation, a nation of priests, and we're supposed to impact the nations of the world. But the nations of the world are not required to become Jewish. So are we supposed to try to proselytize them? So this is something that it's not clear from the text of the Torah that we're not supposed to, but we definitely made a political decision through our history to not do it. And we as a general rule, we don't proselytize, even though Abraham seemed to be doing it a little bit in the Bible. Abraham was doing it. But nevertheless, what's the role of the nations of the world? How do they worship God if we're not supposed to proselytize? So the rabbis introduced us to this idea, which is not commanded explicitly in the Torah. It's not commanded anywhere. We never see this anywhere in the Torah. But they introduced us to the ideas of the Sheva Mitzvos Nitzdavu B'nei Noach. There were 7 commandments that the Noahites were commanded, meaning to say the Noahites were given 7 commandments. What's the source for this idea? Where do we see in the Torah explicitly that the Noahites were commanded to observe these 7 laws? Now, where does it say that in the Torah? Anybody know? Like, what's the verse? What's the verse? So the rabbis are going to cite the verse, but it's not intuitive. You could have read the Bible 1,000 times and never found this source. And so we'll go to that in a moment. But first, there are some sources. The Gemara Chulin says that there are 30 commandments that the Noahites were given. Even before we name these 7 commandments, the Sefer HaChinuch, the medieval work, it was written anonymously, but it's Spanish medieval work in the 14th century. Says these are not 7 specific commandments. These are 7 categories. I mean, to say that these are way more than 7 commandments, just like we all know that many of the commandments of the Jewish people are way more. Like you say, if you count Shabbos as one commandment, it's just so overwhelming the number of laws. So these are 7 categories that the Noahides were commanded to observe. And there are groups of people today, clearly, who identify as Noahides who want to keep these seven laws. So does anybody know what the 7 laws are? I'll read this text here. So the 7 Noahide laws are as follows. I'm reading from the Gemara in Sanhedrin 56a, which is the text, and it's our responsibility if a person who's not of the Jewish faith says, I really love the Torah, I want to become Jewish, and they can become Jewish, but really they're not required to by the Torah. All they're required, not all, what they are required to do is to observe the 7 Noahide laws. And these are the laws. The first is what we just been talking about, dinim. That is a court system. And so the Rambam rules in laws of kings that they're obligated to set up judges in every place. And what will this court system do? It will judge civil law and also make sure that they're keeping the other 6 Noahide laws. The Nachmanides says that they're commanded to keep make sure that people are being honest, that they're not stealing, that they're paying their workers on time, and all of Nachmanides says this includes all of civil law, all of tort law, that contract law that the Jews are commanded in. So basically, we just spent over a year discussing all the babas. All of the babas, Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Batra, that's all included in all this. They have to set up a court system to adjudicate all the laws properly. So that's far-fetched. You wouldn't tell somebody, it's hard enough to get a Jew to go to a bet din. To tell that the Gentiles of the world that they're responsible to go to a bet din is far-fetched. So the Maimonides says that they have to set up a court system and obey it. And so that's what every country has to do. It'll say that one of the hallmarks of a functioning country is an independent judicial system. If it doesn't have an independent judicial system, the country is in big trouble. That's just I hope it's not too political for some people, but that's a basic tenet of a functioning free country, an independent judicial system. So then the second of the commandments that they have to keep is what's called Birkat Hashem. What's Birkat Hashem? It literally translates as the blessing of the name, but here it's euphemistically because we don't want to say cursing. We don't want to say cursing of the name, so therefore we say blessing of the name. But I'm just explaining it so you understand what it is. So basically, this is the second commandment that they're not allowed to speak in a bad way about the name of God. And why is this so important? Because basically you have to accept the basic value of our society. The third way is avodah zarah, idolatry, and here too we mean to say that you have to worship one God. You can't worship many gods. We could say that here at least in my opinion, it's not the opinion that's shared but probably not by the majority of rabbis, but it strikes me that the Jewish people were successful in this area, that most of the world now accepts one God, and Christianity and Islam to me strike me as faiths that believe in one God, and so therefore this is the way in which we've been very, very successful. The fourth law is Gilui Arayos, that these are laws of licentiousness, adultery, that a person is not that the nations of the world cannot engage in prohibited sexual activity. So we probably have we still have some work to do in that area, but in convincing the world. But nevertheless, this is the fourth of the laws, and as you can see, these are huge categories which include much of the Torah. And the fifth is shfichus damim, which is murder. The sixth is gazel, theft, and the seventh is aver min hachai, that you're not allowed to take a limb from a living animal. The commentaries say that this actually relates if you're saying these as a larger category, is that this relates to Tar Balei Chaim, treating animals with with kindness and sensitivity and not treating them cruelly. Why would somebody rip off the limb from a living animal? So some want to say that it's because that this was they didn't have refrigeration. So what they used to do was they used to chop off a leg of like an animal that they wanted to eat, keep the animal alive, so that until they were ready for the next leg, and that would be a way of keeping the animal fresher. And obviously, it's very cruel. So these are the seven commandments. There's one major problem, which how could you say that the Rambam already points out that Adam himself was only commanded on 6 of these because that taking off the limb from an animal was only prohibited to the children of Noah because Adam wasn't eating meat at all. However, Rashi and Tosfot say that's not the case. Also, Adam was prohibited in this, and so therefore, it was an additional prohibition. So, okay, hold on. Let me just pause for a moment. We have a question here, and I'm going to say the source for it. The Talmud wants to suggest what's the source for these Noahide laws. So the Talmud has different suggestions. And first of all, I should note that this is not universally accepted that these are the 7 Noahide laws. The Gemara on 56b in Sanhedrin says they're also commanded that you're not allowed to drink the blood of a living animal. This is something that if there's anybody on here from England, I know that they like to have the blood pudding. So I don't know if you saw that growing up in England. Did anybody see the blood pudding? That's where they drink the blood of the living animal. Or Rebbe Chitka, you saw that?
Yeah, they have blood sausage, I think they call it, but no, it's horrible. I mean, it looks horrible. Blood
Yeah, and also
sausage.
I don't know if they take that from the living animal or the dead animal. But England's a very nice place. The people are wonderful, but they're not known for their cuisine like the French, right?
Right.
So, okay. So then Rabbi Chidka says they're also, and this is actually going to be, this could actually go back to the question April was asking before. They're commanded not to do sirus, meaning to say they're not allowed to do an action that causes people or animals to be unable to procreate. So that's the opposite of puravu. So maybe this answers of being multiplying. Maybe this answers April's question. They were commanded, but it was done in the negative way. And Rabbi Shimon says they're also commanded on not to be to do black, like sorcery. Rabbi Yossi says he adds on that all the things there. He says all the prohibitions of sorcery are included. Then Rabbi Lazar comes along and says they're also commanded not to make kalayim. Kalayim is this admixture. Meaning to say that you mate 2 different animals to create a new species. Or they went to some of the poskim when cloning was first coming out. I don't really talk about cloning too much. They just because now we just create the own creatures. But they asked them about whether cloning was prohibited, and they pointed to a Ramban that says that what's the reason why kalayim is prohibited, mating 2 different species together? Because we're not allowed to create a new species that God didn't create, and so. I mean to say that's like trying to change the world's nature. And so that's what the nations of the world are included in this as well. So what's the source for this idea? So there are a couple of theories. So the Gemara cites the position of Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan says that the source for it comes from this verse in the 2nd chapter of the Bible, the 2nd chapter, which we would not have actually, I read it many times, and we wouldn't have thought that this is the source for the 7 Noahide laws. It says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 16, Vayitzav Hashem Elokim ala Adam le'mor mikol eitz hagan achol tochel. God commanded man, saying from the entire mikol eitz hagan, from every tree in the garden you could eat. And so Rabbi Yochanan says that this actually teaches us about the seven Noahide laws. It says Vayitzav, he commanded. This refers to civil law. Elah dinim. This refers to enforcing laws, as it says. You should command the children to do righteousness and justice and charity. So that's the first idea. So then they ask the question: why aren't the nations of the world commanded to give charity? So the word tzedakah here does not mean charity. It means like mediation or righteousness. And then it says in this verse, Vayitzav Hashem. So from the fact that it says God's name, it means that this refers to the fact that you're not allowed to bless God. And it says, and I'm speaking euphemistically, as it says, the one who pierces God's name shall surely die. And then it says, Vayitzav Hashem Elokim, and the name for God here is Elokim. This refers to the prohibition against idolatry. As it says, Elohim Achirim. In our portion, it says you cannot have any other God. So Elohim here is a reference to God is commanding about not worshiping idolatry. And then it says Al Ha'adam, about man. And so Rabbi Yochanan says that this refers to the prohibition of murder. And so too it says in Noach, Shofech Dam Ha'adam B'damo Yishafech, one who spills the blood of man in his blood. Some say that refers to the prohibition of killing a fetus. And then it says then the next commandment is Giloy Arayot, because that comes from the word Vayitzav Hashem Elokim Al Adam Limor, that God is commanding man staying, and that refers to licentiousness, because this comes from the verse from Jeremiah saying, a man will send away his wife and she'll go from him and be with another man. So some want to say, well, maybe the nations of the world are prohibited to do what's called machzir grushaso, to remarry your wife after you divorce her, but they say that doesn't apply. And now then the next commandment is mikol eit zagan. And what is this the commandment to? That means you're not allowed to steal, meaning to say, you're only allowed to take from the trees of the garden, but you're not allowed to take from somebody else's. And achol tochel, that you can eat, but not aver menachai, and not the limb, not ripping off the limb from an animal. And so we see from here that this is the basic source for Rabbi Yochanan, that these are the laws of the seven Noahide laws. So let me just summarize what we said until now, because I don't want to leave everybody confused. Basically, we said that what is the parasha of Yisro doing here? So my overarching feeling is that the passage of Yisro comes before the giving of the Torah to tell us that the Torah is not just for the Jewish people, the Torah is for the nations of the world. The Torah is for all the nations of the world, and it's our responsibility to influence the nations of the world with the powerful teachings of the Torah. But the nations of the world do not have to do all the commandments of the Torah. They have to do the seven Noahide laws. But these seven Noahide laws are not just seven minor laws. They're the seven basic laws that have overarching categories. What's excluded from these categories? Things that are specifically unique to Jewish worship, like, for example, tefillin, or the holidays, this Shabbat, the Pesach. These are the specific types of laws that are excluded from the seven Noahide laws. But many of the other laws are included in the seven Noahide laws, because basically all the laws of Dinim, which is basically all of the tractate, the volume known as Nezikin, all civil laws, all the laws of sexuality. This is the laws of Nashim, of the category of women. So interactions about marriage, all that is included. So basically, many laws are included, universal laws, but the specific laws are excluded. And so that's what the passage, this is like reminding us that even though the Ten Commandments were given to the Jewish people, we have a responsibility to bring forth the teachings of the Torah to the entire world. And as Thera said, through every single interaction that we have with everybody in the world, we have an ability to teach and impact. So let me stop here. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to try to address them.